He stood at the edge of my garden in the fading light, hat in his hands, and called out, "Eleanor." Soft like a prayer. But Eleanor drowned in 1984 and I buried her myself. I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in 40 years. My name is Mae, and I've lived alone in this house since my husband passed in 92. The garden still blooms, the porch still creaks, and the silence has become a kind of companion. I raised my sister Eleanor here after our parents died, just the two of us against the world. She was 17 when the river took her. They never found her body. I learned to live with the loss the way you learn to live with a scar. But yesterday, a man I've never seen before stood at my gate and called her name like she was standing right beside me. The light was fading when I heard the gate creak. I was bent low over the roses, pruning back the wild growth near the fence. My knees ached the way they always do this time of day, but I didn't mind. The garden was quiet. The air smelled like turned earth and something sweet I couldn't name. I didn't expect company. I never do. I looked up. A man stood at the edge of my property just beyond the gate. He held his hat in both hands, fingers turning the brim slowly, like he was working up the courage to speak. He was older, maybe my age, maybe older. Hard to tell. His face was weathered, lined deep around the eyes. But his eyes themselves were kind. Soft. The kind of eyes that belonged to someone who'd seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. He didn't move closer. Just stood there waiting. I straightened slowly, brushing the dirt from my gloves. My back protested. I pressed a hand to my spine and took a breath. "Can I help you?" I called out. He hesitated. Then he smiled just a little, just enough to soften his face. "Eleanor." The name hit me like cold water. I froze. My hand still held the pruning shears. The metal felt heavy suddenly, like I'd forgotten how to hold them. He took a small step forward, tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to see me better in the failing light. "Eleanor, is that you?" I didn't answer right away. My throat had gone tight. I set the shears down carefully on the garden bench and pulled off my gloves, one finger at a time. "Foley. Buying time." "No," I said finally. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. "No, I'm Mae." He blinked. His smile faltered. "Mae," he repeated like he was testing the name in his mouth. "Way." I nodded. Eleanor was my sister. The words felt strange to say out loud. I hadn't spoken her name to a stranger in years. Decades maybe. The man's face changed. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands stopped moving. He just stood there staring at me like I'd told him the world had ended. "Your sister," he said quietly. "Yes." He looked down at his hat. His fingers gripped the brim tighter. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to, I thought." He stopped. Shook his head. Then he looked up at me again and I saw something in his eyes I couldn't name. Grief maybe. Or guilt. "I'm sorry," he said again. And then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation. No goodbye. He put his hat back on his head and walked down the road, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow and deliberate. I watched him go. I didn't call after him. I didn't know what to say. The gate creaked again in the breeze. I stood there for a long time, my hands still holding my gloves, my heart beating too fast in my chest. The roses swayed gently beside me. The sky had turned violet. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. I didn't know him. But something about his voice, the way he'd said her name, felt familiar. Like an echo of something I'd heard before. Something I'd buried. I went inside when the last of the light faded. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the window cracked open, the curtains lifting gently in the breeze. The house was silent except for the old familiar sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards settling. Sounds I'd learned to live with. But I couldn't stop hearing his voice. "Eleanor." Soft. Almost tender. Like he'd known her. I rolled onto my side and stared at the wall. The moonlight painted faint shadows across the room. I tried to remember if Eleanor had ever mentioned anyone named. What? I didn't even know his name. He hadn't said. I hadn't asked. I closed my eyes and tried to picture her face. Eleanor at 17. Laughing in the kitchen, flour on her hands. Eleanor in the garden, barefoot, her hair tied back with a ribbon. Eleanor standing by the river, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the water like she was waiting for something. I hadn't thought about her in detail like this in years. It hurt too much. But now the memories were coming back, slow and heavy like water seeping through a crack. Had there been someone? I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. There had been a summer. The summer before she died. She'd been different. Quieter but not sad. Secretive maybe. She'd spent more time away from the house. Said she was walking. Said she needed air. I never asked where she went. I was 23. I had my own life. My own worries. I didn't think to wonder. I pressed my palms against my eyes and took a slow breath. Eleanor. The way he'd said her name, like he'd been waiting 40 years to say it again. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The road outside was empty. Dark. The trees swayed gently in the wind. Somewhere far off, I heard the distant hum of a car passing. I wondered where he'd gone. I wondered if he'd come back. And I wondered, God help me, if Eleanor had loved him. The thought settled in my chest like a stone. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the shadows move across the road, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of a name I hadn't spoken in 40 years pressing down on me like something living. Eleanor. She'd been gone so long. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like she was close again. The attic smelled like dust and time. I stood at the bottom of the pull-down stairs, one hand on the railing, staring up into the dim square of light above me. I hadn't been up there in years. Maybe longer. There was no reason to go. Everything worth keeping was already down here with me. But this morning I needed to see her face. I climbed slowly, one step at a time. My knees complained. The wood creaked under my weight. When I reached the top, I pulled the string for the light. The bulb flickered twice before it settled into a weak yellow glow. Boxes everywhere. Stacked against the walls. Covered in years of stillness. I took a breath and began. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. A memory maybe. Proof that Eleanor had been real. That she'd lived here once, laughed here, left something behind besides the ache in my chest. I opened the first box carefully. Old linens. Tablecloths my mother had embroidered. I ran my fingers over the stitching, small, careful loops, and felt the weight of her patience in every thread. I set it aside. The second box held Christmas ornaments. The third my husband's things. His watch. His reading glasses. A deck of cards he used to shuffle at the kitchen table while we talked. I closed that one quickly. The fourth box was smaller. Tucked in the corner, half hidden behind a broken lamp. I pulled it toward me and lifted the lid. Books. Old hymnals. A few paperbacks with cracked spines. And at the bottom, wrapped in a faded dish towel, a Bible. I knew it immediately. It had been Eleanor's. I lifted it carefully, unwrapping the cloth like I was holding something fragile. The leather cover was soft, worn smooth at the edges where her hands had held it. I opened it slowly. The pages were thin yellowed. Some of the corners were dog-eared. And then something slipped out. A photograph. It landed face up on my lap. I stared at it. Eleanor. She was 16, maybe 17. Standing in the sun, her hair loose around her shoulders, smiling in that way she used to, like she had a secret she wasn't ready to share. She wore a sundress I remembered. White with tiny flowers. She'd sewn it herself. But she wasn't alone. There was a boy beside her. His arm around her shoulders. He was smiling too, but softer. Like he was looking at her instead of the camera. I didn't recognize him. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Eleanor's handwriting, small, slanted, careful. Jimmy, summer of '83. My heart stuttered. I read it again. Jimmy. The name sat heavy in my chest. I looked at the boy's face again. Really looked. The shape of his jaw. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners. The tilt of his head. And then I saw it. Him. The man from yesterday. Older now. Worn by years. But it was him. I was sure of it. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Gimme. Had Eleanor ever mentioned him? I tried to think back. Tried to pull the memory forward through the fog of 40 years. But there was nothing. Just empty space where a name should have been. How could I not have known? I stared at the photograph, my hands trembling slightly. Eleanor's smile looked different now. Not just happy, but private. Like she was holding something close. Something she hadn't told me. I felt a strange, quiet ache settle in my ribs. She'd had a life I didn't know about. I sat there for a long time, the photograph resting in my lap, the attic silent around me except for the faint creak of the house settling. The light above me flickered once, then steadied. I thought about the summer of '83. I would have been 22. Working at the library in town. I just started seeing Robert, the man who would become my husband. I remembered being distracted that summer. Happy. Wrapped up in my own world. Eleanor had been quieter than usual. I remembered that now. She'd spent more time out of the house. Said she was going for walks. Meeting friends. I never asked which friends. God, I never asked. I turned the photo over again and traced her handwriting with my finger. Gimme. Who was he? Where had they met? How long had they been together? And why hadn't she told me? The questions piled up in my mind like stones. I looked at Eleanor's face again. At the way she leaned into him. At the way his hand rested on her shoulder. Gentle, protective. She'd loved him. I could see it now. In the way she smiled. In the way she stood close to him like she belonged there. And then a year later she was gone. Drowned in the river. Body never found. Just gone. I closed my eyes and took a slow, shaky breath. Had he known? Had he been there that night? I needed to find him. I needed to know what he knew about my sister. What he remembered. What she told him that she'd never told me. I folded the photograph carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Then I placed the Bible back in the box, wrapped it in the dish towel and closed the lid. When I climbed back down the attic stairs, the house felt different. Quieter somehow. Like it was holding its breath. I stood in the hallway, one hand resting on the wall, the photograph pressing against my leg through the fabric of my pocket. The light from the window fell across the floor in soft, golden squares. I thought about the man at the gate. The way he'd said her name. Eleanor. Like a prayer. Like a wound. He'd loved her too. I was sure of it now. And tomorrow I would find him. The diner sat on the corner of Pinewood Road, same as it had for 50 years. I parked in front and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, staring at the faded sign above the door. Rosie's. The letters were chipped, the paint peeling. But the place was still open. Still serving coffee and pie to anyone who walked through the door. I hadn't been here in years. I took a breath and got out of the car. The bell above the door timed as I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Coffee, grease, something sweet baking in the back. The booths were cracked red vinyl. The floor was checkerboard tile, scuffed and worn smooth by decades of footsteps. A few people sat scattered throughout. A man reading a newspaper, a young couple sharing fries, an older woman staring out the window with her hands wrapped around a mug. I chose a seat at the counter. A waitress appeared almost immediately. She was older than me, I thought. Her hair was white, pulled back in a loose bun. Her apron was stained with coffee and something that might have been ketchup. But her eyes were sharp. Alert. She smiled. Coffee, hon. Please. She poured without asking how I took it. Set the cup down gently in front of me. The steam curled upward and I wrapped my hands around the warmth. You need a menu? She asked. No, thank you. I hesitated. Actually, I was wondering if you could help me with something. She tilted her head slightly. Sure. What do you need? I pulled the photograph from my pocket and set it on the counter between us. Eleanor and Jimmy. Summer of '83. I'm looking for this man, I said quietly. His name is Jimmy. I think he used to live around here. The waitress leaned down, squinting at the photo. Her expression shifted just a little. Recognition. Jimmy Crow, she said softly. My heart skipped. You know him? I do. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. He used to work at the lumber mill before it closed. That was, 85 I think. Maybe 86. Do you know where he is now? She hesitated. Her eyes flicked back to the photograph, then to me. He still lives around here. Got a little cabin just outside town. Near the river. The river. My stomach tightened. He keeps to himself mostly, she continued. Doesn't come into town much. But I see him at the general store every now and then. Quiet man. Polite. He paused, studying my face. You know him? No, I said. But he knew my sister. Her expression softened. She looked down at the photograph again and something sad flickered across her face. The girl in the picture? I nodded. She drowned, the waitress said quietly. Long time ago. I remember when it happened. The whole town was talking about it. My throat went tight. I didn't trust myself to speak. The waitress reached under the counter and pulled out a napkin and a pen. She scribbled something down, then slid it across to me. That's the address, she said. It's about 10 minutes from here. Take Route 9 south, then turn left onto Old Mill Road. You'll see the cabin set back in the trees. I stared at the napkin. The ink was smudged slightly where her hand had rested. He left town not long after she died, the waitress added softly. But he came back a few years later. Don't know why. Some people just can't leave, I guess. I folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into my pocket alongside the photograph. Thank you, I whispered. She nodded. You take care, hon. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. The engine was off. The windows were cracked. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the faint chime of the diner bell as someone else walked in. I pulled the napkin out and unfolded it. 472 Old Mill Road. My hands were shaking. I set the napkin on the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel. Tried to steady my breathing. The river. He lived near the river. I hadn't been back there since the day they stopped searching. The day they told me Eleanor's body was gone. Swept downstream maybe. Caught somewhere we'd never find. I'd stood on the bank that day staring at the water and I'd promised myself I'd never go back. But now I had to. I needed to know what he knew. What Eleanor had told him. Why she'd been at the river that night. Why she'd never come home. I pressed my palms against my eyes and took a slow, shaky breath. Maybe he had answers. Maybe he didn't. But I couldn't keep living with the questions. I started the car. The engine turned over with a low rumble. I sat there for another moment staring at the address, feeling the weight of it pressing down on my chest. Then I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. Route 9 stretched out ahead of me, long and empty. The trees on either side were thick, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. The light filtered through in patches, casting shifting shadows across the road. I kept my hands tight on the wheel. 10 minutes, the waitress had said. It felt longer. I turned left onto Old Mill Road. The pavement gave way to gravel. The trees grew closer, denser. I slowed down, scanning the side of the road for a cabin. And then I saw it. Set back from the road, half hidden by the trees. Small. Weathered. A thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. I pulled over and stopped. My heart was pounding. I stared at the cabin through the windshield, my hands still gripping the wheel. He was in there. Jimmy Crow. The boy from the photograph. The man from my gate. The man who'd loved my sister. I took a breath. And then I opened the car door. The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked toward the cabin. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the river, low and constant like a whisper I'd been trying to forget. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The door was closed. The windows were dark. I stood there for a long moment, my heart racing, my hands trembling at my sides. Then I climbed the steps. And I knocked. He was sitting on the porch when I arrived. Not moving. Not reading. Just sitting in an old wooden chair, his hands resting on his knees, staring out at the trees like he'd been waiting for me. Maybe he had been. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, watching him through the windshield. He didn't turn. Didn't wave. Just sat there, still as stone, the afternoon light filtering through the branches above him. I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked toward the cabin. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. Somewhere behind the trees I could hear the river, low and steady like a heartbeat I'd tried to forget. Jimmy stood as I approached. Slowly. Like his joints ached the way mine did. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with those same kind eyes I'd seen at my gate. But this time there was something else in them. Something quiet and resigned. "May," he said softly. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. "I thought you might come." His voice was gentle. Worn. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "I needed to know," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he gestured toward the door. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." The cabin was small. Clean. Sparse. A wood-burning stove sat in the corner, still warm. A single couch covered with a faded quilt. A small table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined with books, their spines cracked and worn. The kind of place where a man lived alone and didn't mind it. Jimmy moved to the stove and poured water into a kettle. His hands were steady, but I could see the tremor in his fingers when he reached for the coffee tin. I sat at the table and waited. He didn't speak until the coffee was ready. He poured 2 cups, set one in front of me, and sat down across from me. The chair creaked under his weight. For a long moment neither of us said anything. We just sat there, hands wrapped around our cups, the silence heavy between us. Finally he spoke. "I loved her." His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked up at him. His eyes were fixed on the table, his jaw tight. "I loved her," he said again. "More than anything." I felt my throat tighten. "We met the summer before," he continued. "At the county fair. She was standing by the Ferris wheel alone, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." He smiled faintly. A sad, broken smile. "We started meeting after that. In secret. She said her sister didn't know. Said she didn't want to worry you." My chest ached. "We talked about running away," Jimmy said. "Starting over somewhere new. Just the 2 of us. She wanted to go to the coast. Said she'd never seen the ocean." He paused. Took a slow breath. "We planned it for August. The night of the 12th. Midnight. We were going to meet at the river and leave together." I set my cup down. My hands were shaking. "I waited for her," he said quietly. "I got there early. Stood by the water for hours. But she never came." His voice cracked. "I thought maybe she changed her mind. That she was scared. I kept waiting. Kept telling myself she'd show up." He looked up at me then and I saw the tears in his eyes. And then I heard the sirens. The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't breathe. "I ran toward the road," he continued. "Saw the lights. The ambulance. The police. I heard people shouting. And then someone said her name." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "They found her dress by the water. Her shoes. But not her." A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. "I should have gone looking for her sooner," Jimmy whispered. "I should have known something was wrong. Maybe if I'd—" "No," I said. My voice came out hoarse. Broken. "No," I said again, louder this time. "You couldn't have known." He shook his head. "I've lived with it for 40 years, May. The guilt. The not knowing. I left town because I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand seeing the river every day. But I came back. Because I couldn't stay away either. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I think about her every day. Wonder what she was thinking that night. He was scared. If she called for me. His voice broke completely then. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough. Calloused. Warm. She loved you, I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes red and wet. I found a photograph, I continued, of the two of you. She wrote your name on the back. Jimmy, summer of '83. She kept it in her Bible. He closed his eyes. A sob caught in his throat. She had a whole life I didn't know about, I whispered. And I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I didn't ask. We sat there for a long time, hands clasped across the table, the weight of 40 years pressing down on both of us. Outside, the river whispered. When I finally stood to leave, Jimmy walked me to the door. He paused on the threshold, his hand resting on the frame. There's something else, he said quietly. I turned. He disappeared into the cabin for a moment, then returned holding something small in his hand. A locket. He held it out to me. She gave this to me the week before, he said. Told me to keep it safe. Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to you. My hands trembled as I took it. The locket was silver, tarnished with age. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Tiny. Fragile. I unfolded it. Eleanor's handwriting. If anything happens to me, tell May I'm sorry. Tell her I was trying to be brave. The tears came then. Hot and fast. Jimmy's voice was gentle. She loved you too, May. More than anything. I nodded, clutching the locket to my chest. Thank you, I whispered. He smiled. Sit. Quiet. Take care of yourself. I walked back to my car, the locket heavy in my hand, Eleanor's words echoing in my mind. I was trying to be brave. The hallway smelled of old wood and dust. Jimmy's shoes scuffed the floor quietly, but I heard every step. The house felt heavy, like it had been holding its breath for 40 years. I didn't move at first. Just let the quiet fold around me. He held something in his palm. Small. Light. But it carried the weight of decades. I think you should have this, he said. His voice was low, careful. I took it. A locket. Cold metal against my fingers. I didn't open it right away. Didn't want to disturb the silence that had been gathering between us like fog. The floor creaked under my weight. I could hear the tick of the clock in the corner, slow and deliberate, like it was counting down to a secret. I sat at the edge of the chair near the window. The locket fit in my hand as if it had always belonged there. I opened it. Inside was a folded note. Eleanor's handwriting, small, precise, trembling just slightly. If anything happens to me, tell May I'm sorry. Tell her I was trying to be brave. I read it again. And again. Her words weren't excuses. They weren't confessions. They were something quieter. Something I'd never heard from her. A hope. For a moment I just held it against my chest. Felt the paper against my skin. Felt the pulse of memory, of laughter spilling into the kitchen, of whispered arguments over nothing and everything, of evenings spent in silence side by side, pretending life was simpler than it was. The sun filtered through the curtains. It fell on the note. Gold and warm. Almost holy. Almost forgiving. I understood then in a way I hadn't before. Eleanor wasn't running from me. She was running toward something she needed. Toward love. Toward a life she wanted to choose for herself. Toward courage I had never recognized in her. I looked up at Jimmy. His eyes were steady but the corners were soft. He waited without speaking. I understand, I said finally. He nodded. And then he left. Just like that he left. The door shut with a quiet finality. I drove to the river. 40 years and I had never gone back. Not once. But that locket, it pulled me there. The road smelled like autumn. Damp leaves and the faint tang of water. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. When I reached the riverbank the world was still. The water reflected the sky, low and endless. Ducks drifted quietly in the distance. A single branch tapped the surface. That was it. Just the world breathing around me. I stepped out of the car. Clutched the locket in my palm. The earth was soft under my shoes. Mud pressed into the soles. I knelt at the edge and opened the locket once more. Eleanor's handwriting stared back at me. Small, precise, trembling. I whispered her name. Not in grief. Not in anger. But in forgiveness. Eleanor. The wind moved through the reeds. A bird cried somewhere upstream. I felt her presence not as absence but as a tide folding back to shore. I traced the edges of the locket with my thumb. Felt the cool metal warm under my skin. Felt the paper soften with my touch. Felt something in me uncoil. I imagined her running. Not away. But forward. Not afraid, not desperate, but alive. Seeking a life she deserved. A life that I had only just begun to understand. I let my shoulders drop. Let the tension I had carried for decades slip into the river, carried away with the current. The sun was lowering, painting the water in streaks of orange and pink. Each wave caught the light and flung it back at me in tiny sparks. It was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. Not anymore. I whispered again. Eleanor. And I heard the word echo in my own heart. A sound that had been waiting, patient for 40 years. I pressed the locket to my lips. Whispered a thank you, though I wasn't sure who I was thanking. Jimmy, the river, her. All of them and none. The water moved like memory. Like forgiveness. Like release. I let the locket slip back into my palm. Let the sun warm it. Let it remind me that letting go didn't mean forgetting. I stayed there until the sky turned a deep violet. Until the first stars blinked awake. Until the air grew cool and damp and quiet. And for the first time in decades I did not feel the weight of missing her. Not completely. Not yet. Just the warmth of understanding. The stillness of acceptance. And the river, it kept flowing. I finally turned to leave. The locket went back into my coat pocket. Safe. Close. But not heavy anymore. The car door clicked shut. The tires whispered over gravel. The world beyond the river waited. But something inside me stayed. A small, steady light. I whispered one last time as I drove away. Goodbye, Eleanor. I love you. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a streak of gold across the water. And I knew she was free. And maybe finally, so was I.